Okay, it's good to have you here. Mr. David Richter is joining the New Jersey Constitutional Republican virtual conversation this afternoon. David, thank you for joining us, and how are you today?
JR, I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Great. I'd like to read a statement before we begin, David, and that is the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans are an equal opportunity provider for all candidates and representatives, regardless of who, what, or where they are from. Our purpose is to educate and inform. Anyone is welcome to participate in a New Jersey Constitutional Republican virtual conversation, which is a new format and available to us all. Well, David, it's great to talk to you again and to see you. Please give our audience a little bit of a bio about yourself and talk a little bit about your acumen, your business acumen. You've been a very successful businessman, and also your academic accomplishments, which are very, very impressive as well. So talk to us about David Richter, the man, a little bit.
Thank you, JR. I'd be happy to. I grew up in South Jersey. In fact, I grew up right here in the 3rd District. I grew up in Willingboro and later in Cherry Hill. And I worked here for most of my career in Willingboro and then later Evesham, helping to build a family business. I ran a company called Hill International that was started by my father. And when I joined the company in the mid-90s, it was really struggling. Frankly, it was on the verge of bankruptcy for quite a few years. And we worked hard. We turned the business around. And when I started there, we had about 300 employees doing about $20 million a year in revenue. And then when I left, we had about 4,300 employees doing over $500 million a year in revenue. And we were a New York Stock Exchange listed public company. Involved in construction management on public works and infrastructure projects all over the world. Probably more than 50 countries we did business in. And my personal background, I went to public schools in Willingboro and Cherry Hill. I stayed local for college. I went to the University of Pennsylvania, earned 2 bachelor's degrees in business and engineering, stayed for law school there. And then a little later in life, I went back and got a master's degree in business at the University of Oxford over in England. And then recently, as preparing for the next stage of my life and my career, I went back to school to the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and earned a master's degree there in government. And, I was weighing running for public office or serving in government. And even though I'm an attorney and I've cared about political issues, my entire life, I felt since I had spent my career in the private sector, going back to school and studying and reading and thinking and discussing public policy and government and those kinds of issues, as I was getting ready for what turned out to be a race for Congress, I thought was a pretty good idea. It was a lot of work, but I'm glad I did it. I graduated a year ago on May 30th of last year. And on May 31st, I was in South Jersey campaigning for Congress. So I've been keeping myself pretty busy, and I'm looking forward to the primary, which is now only about 5 weeks away. And then hopefully the general election, if I'm successful in the primary, and taking on Andy Kim and making him a one-term congressman.
Great. Well, it's a remarkable resume, David. I find it truly amazing, your success in business and also, of course, your academic accomplishments, in my estimation, really give you a tremendous advantage in properly representing the people of CD3. And of course, you and I got to know each other during your time down here at CD2, but it certainly is a very important part of the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans in that we want to educate the voters and the citizens. And we believe it's very important for representatives we need to hold our elected representatives to a higher bar, that they need to be able to understand what it is their responsibilities are. And that means they need to know about the Constitution, which is something that you're very familiar with and that you have a tremendous amount of accomplishment. So you personify in many ways what the type of representative we need based upon knowledge and life experience.
Well,
and as you know, David, and as you know, the founders wanted those who would be in the House of Representatives to be the closest to the people. You only have a 2-year term. And generally, these men were intended to be very much like yourself, a successful businessmen running businesses, understanding finances, and also the particular needs of that geographical area from where they're from. So if you could give the audience a little bit of information on CD3 and some of the responsibilities, some of the considerations that you would take to Washington, D.C. in representing the people of CD3.
Well, before I do that, let me say a couple things in response to what you said earlier, which is I know a lot of people think there are too many lawyers in politics, and they're probably right. But when you're electing someone to serve in Congress, in the legislature, and your job is to write or rewrite the laws of our country, having a legal training is critically important. And
Yes.
the past year that I spent in school at Harvard, reading the Constitution, reading the Federalist Papers, learning about the background and the history of our country, and I apologize for the ringing phone. It's just absolutely invaluable, and it's the foundation upon which our entire society, our country, is built on that Constitution. And I really respect the job that you do and your organization does in talking about and discussing and promoting the Constitution as the foundational bedrock of our country. On CD3, I think the district is sort of the bread and butter, the heartland of New Jersey. It's predominantly suburban, like most of our state is. It encompasses almost all of Burlington County, where I grew up, where I worked for a long time in a family business, and about 2/3 or so of Ocean County. Burlington County has become very Democratic of late. That's part of the reason why Andy Kim managed to get in office 2 years ago. Ocean County is probably the reddest county in the entire state. Very strong Republican Party there. Very solid Republican voting base. And I'm convinced that that's going to carry me into victory in the primary, which is coming up on July 7th. I received the endorsement of the Ocean County Republican Party at their convention back in early March, which I worked hard for and appreciate it, and I'm very, very grateful for. And I'm looking forward to putting the primary behind me. Andy Kim, frankly, sort of snuck into Congress 2 years ago. He came in with the blue wave. He did not, he grew up in New Jersey, but he hadn't lived here his entire adult life. And he moved back to New Jersey just to run for Congress. And in 2018, he was essentially generic Democratic candidate. Nobody knew anything about him. They didn't know what he stood for. But 2018 was one of those years with the blue wave where a generic Democratic candidate could win a congressional seat. Fortunately, Andy now has a 2-year record that he's got to run on and he's got to defend. And I intend to make that a major part of this campaign. One of the promises that he made in 2018 was that he was not going to support Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House. And I can assure you I won't either. But the first thing he did when he got to Congress was he voted for her for Speaker. He broke a promise that he made to the voters of CD3. He also promised to be a moderate voice for South Jersey in Congress. And he has been anything but. He voted for Nancy Pelosi 98% of the time. And when he got down to Washington, he joined the House Progressive Caucus, which is the most extreme left-wing part of the Democratic Party down there. It's the group that AOC and Ilhan Omar and the rest of the squad are members of. It was a group actually co-founded by Bernie Sanders, and he's the only member of the Senate that is a member of the Progressive Caucus. Not a single Democratic U.S. senator is willing to join the group because it's so radical, and 60% of House Democrats won't even join it because it's so radical. And yet that's where Andy Kim decided to hang his hat, and he works with the far extreme left of his party. That is anything but a moderate voice for South Jersey.
Yes, no question, David. It's interesting you talk about AOC and the Justice Democrats, if you will. And we talked about the fact that the founders intended men who were successful, who had been accomplished businessmen, who were educated. And then those people would apply for the position and run for election. Whereas the Justice Democrats, they put out auditioning notices. And they put out auditioning notices for people like AOC and some of the other candidates or some of the other prospective candidates, and they are told what it is they're supposed to say and what it is they're supposed to believe. it's not coming from the individual. It's coming from the organization, which is the Justice Democrats. And then they go about, funding the candidate, doing all the spending the money to get the person elected. But it's amazing the dichotomy between what the founders intended, an independent individual like yourself going to represent the people of his district, whereas the Justice Democrats audition people and then they tell them, well, this is what you have to do to get elected, and this is the way you're going to think, and this is what how you're going to vote. So it appears that Mr. Kim follows, as most Democrats follow that line to begin with, for sure.
Well, it strays very far from what our framers intended, the founding fathers, and that was a government of citizen statesmen, people that had a career, whether it was gentleman farmer, or merchant, or lawyer, or doctor, and served part-time in their legislature or in their government, advancing the cause of their fellow citizens and their country. Today, unfortunately, a lot of Democrats and even some Republicans view politics as a career, and they want to spend their entire life, working for the government or serving in public office. I view public service as a calling. Long career in the private sector. I've been very fortunate, and I want to give back to my country. I want to serve my country. I want to serve my state, and I want to serve my community in Congress, trying to make this a better nation for all of us.
Right. And David, you're well aware, as we all are, of how unpopular the Congress is. Normally polls have ranked the Congress in popularity down to below 20%. But what's an interesting dichotomy is the fact that everybody likes to blame the federal government, but they should look at their state governments, as we're clearly being evidenced here in New Jersey under the leadership of the current administration, which is picking and choosing who can be open for business, arbitrarily, discriminately making decisions on the economy and on who's able to do business and who isn't. But yet the federal government, in many instances, David, helps the state of New Jersey, especially when it comes to the rules of naturalization and the illegal immigration crisis that we're in being able to subsist and assist ICE in enforcing the rules of naturalization that you, as a United States congressman, are in charge with. And also another example for the people of New Jersey would be the National Reciprocity Bill that unfortunately didn't make it a couple of years ago. And not signed into law, which would have given people the ability to carry their firearms out of state and on their person. So there are examples where the federal government actually helps the citizens of New Jersey more so than our own state governments. What are your thoughts on that?
I think government has at all levels, federal, state, local.
Right.
You can see that in how, let's start with New Jersey as a whole, in how a Democratic governor and a Democratic legislature have been acting very tyrannically. The founding fathers would be outraged by what Phil Murphy's been doing in the state. Grabbing onto power, telling which businesses can be open, which can't be open, completely arbitrarily. I know effective today, there was supposed to be a groundswell of small businesses reopening. I've seen that to a large degree. I hope it continues. We need to get the economy moving again. I find it astounding and astonishing that the governor can decide that professional soccer teams need to reopen, but restaurants and gyms and other small businesses take a back burner, are much less of a priority to him. It's just antithetical to everything that our country stands for.
Right, no question about that. And one of the things that you're going to be dealing with as a congressman, David, would be, of course, the budget process, because as we read United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 7, quote, all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as other bills. And then we read in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, no money, quote, shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law, and a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. And of course, David, a lot of the inadequacies that we have with the budgeting process is because we don't follow the rules. Back in the 1970s, 12 different appropriations were to be required to be voted on for the different federal departments. And of course, that's all been set aside really since 1996. Now we just have these continuing resolutions where we're just biannually, we have this shutdown of the government and so forth. We're not following a strict budget. And of course, as a businessman, you know how important it is to follow that budget and making sure that you're bringing in more than that's going out. What type of an impact do you think you can make down in Washington, trying to help your colleagues understand the necessity of getting back to specific appropriations and working within the limits of a budget?
Well, that's why I'm running for office. The government doesn't take in more than they spend. Spending more than they take in has become, standard operating procedure with government at every level. And the reason I'm running for the House specifically is because of what you just mentioned. The House of Representatives is the taxing and spending branch wing of Congress. It's where all spending and taxing bills, must be. And those are the biggest problems that I see. Congressmen and congresswomen are elected every 2 years. They have a very short-term horizon, and that's by design of the founders who wanted them to be most responsive to the people. But we have long-term spending problems. We have a $25 trillion and growing national debt. We have $1 trillion annual spending deficits have become normal. This year, many multiples of that because of all the stimulus. It's practically Christmas in Washington, D.C. They can't wait for money that they don't have. And the whole concept of stimulus. So let's take money out of the private sector, give it back to the private sector, and think that somehow we're going to stimulate the economy in doing that is just absurd. So I want to do everything I can to get government right-sized, to get rid of wasteful, to get the budget deficit and the national debt under control, to get our taxes down. And our taxes are still too high. We don't have a problem with being undertaxed. We are overtaxed as a nation. We have a huge spending problem in Washington. We have a huge spending problem in the states. And don't think people like Phil Murphy and Andrew Cuomo and Gavin Newsom aren't thinking, hey, this may be our best opportunity. Let's get the federal government to bail us out of decades of bad spending decisions, bad public union contracts, pension programs that were written for the benefit of the employees and not the taxpayers. And think that, as Rahm Emanuel said a long time ago when he was part of the Clinton administration, never let a good crisis go to waste. I'm afraid the Democrats are going to do everything they can to spend this company into bankruptcy even sooner than the path it was already on. And that's why I'm running for Congress.
Very good. And this whole pandemic situation, David, is again brought to our attention. In 2019, the U.S. trade deficit, our trade deficit was $616 billion, according to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis and the U.S. Census. The U.S. imported 3.1 trillion of goods and services while exporting 2.5 trillion. And the deficit is lower than it was in 2018. I think we can attribute to the work of the current administration in helping to shrink that debt a little bit. But what do you think we have to do? As constitutional Republicans, we believe in that tested and tried principle of tariffs, and which goes back to our Whig days and goes back to Lincoln and the initial Republicans. And we really believe that manufacturing needs to occur in America again. We need to be producing and sending our goods abroad as opposed to bringing everything in and not manufacturing in the United States. What do you think has to happen? What do you think? What's the impact that you think you can make in the House of Representatives to number one, shrink that import-export deficit and also create manufacturing in the United States, which helps the middle class?
Well, this may be one of those rare issues where you and I don't entirely agree. But I'm a Republican in part because I'm a free trader by nature. I believe in free trade. Commerce and trade are the source of all of our wealth. I'm not a fan of tariffs. I'm not an alarmist on budget deficits. I am on budget deficits, but I'm not really on trade deficits. The fact is, when we import more than we export, that means we are bringing in the world's goods and services into America and benefiting from those. And we are giving the world our paper dollars in exchange, which they can't do much with other than buy back American goods and services. So I'm not a fan of tariffs. I think the party that tariffs hurt most is the American consumer. Drives up their costs. I have been in support of President Trump. and what he's been doing and taking a much harder line with our trading partners, because I think we absolutely have been taken advantage of by China in particular, but by other countries as well. And we need to take a hard negotiating position in order to get better trading deals from those countries and to make sure that they stop cheating and doing all the things that they do to take advantage of the United States. But ultimately, the goal should be a level playing field, so we can trade with our partners fairly without being taken advantage of.
Right. And it's interesting to note too, David, that the NAFTA agreement, has made it very, very difficult for free trade, even though that's exactly what it was trying to accomplish. And it's taken jobs away from the United States, and it's caused this deficit. So we'll agree to disagree on the tested and tried measure of tariffs, but I'm sure that you're going to be as you go down into Washington, that you'll have an influence on the decision making that's done down there. And one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you is the fact that we know that legislators are supposed to be writing the law. As a lawyer, and lawyers, they understand law, but far too often the lobbyists and the special interests are actually writing the laws, and that's been evident now with the pandemic and the lockdown, and the excessive power given the leaders of the parties and of the Speaker of the House, if you will, where Nancy Pelosi's been alone in Washington to write the laws and have the lobbyists write these laws. What do you think can be done as you go down to D.C. to make sure that legislators, who the people elect, not the lobbyists and special interest groups who are not elected by the people, what do you think that you can do to make sure that laws are being written by legislators and representatives rather than special interest and focus groups?
Yeah, of course. I can't tell you anything that I agree with on regarding Nancy Pelosi and her leadership in the House of Representatives. I think she's done an absolutely terrible job from the beginning with the investigations and the impeachment hearings and everything that she's done to stand in the way of President Trump's agenda, which I support and want to support in Congress going forward. But what she's done lately, there was a $3 trillion stimulus bill that she basically had written on her own, did not go through the normal process of committees, and at a time when most members of Congress weren't in Washington, D.C., doing the job. And now she's allowed them to vote by proxy, so they can stay out of the Capitol, completely contrary to 230 years of precedence in the House. Allow them
of debate
to another member of Congress and vote on their behalf. The citizens that voted them into office did not want their proxy handed off to some other member of Congress to be voted the way they want to, not the way their elected representative wants to vote. And I know that there's some lawsuits pending against the Speaker to stop that from happening, and I support those lawsuits completely. You have an obligation as an elected representative to go down there and vote your conscience and vote with the way that you think is in the best interest of your district and your country. To hand off a proxy to somebody else is just completely absurd and has to be stopped.
Right. Very good. And David, talk to us briefly a little bit about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, if you will. The Republican Party won back the Congress and the legislature back in 2014, made significant gains, of course, in 2016 with the election. I believe even 2012 a lot of gains were made by our party, and substantially because the American people weren't happy with Obamacare. Yet at the same time, it has provided insurance for a great many people. So what do you think, what ideas do you have that would make it more would be more cost conscious, if you will? It's anything but affordable, as we know. The name is a misnomer. But do you have any ideas on how we could better run the Affordable Care Act, how it could be more beneficial to more people and more cost effective?
Yeah, let me talk about healthcare for a second, specifically with respect to Obamacare, because it was basically built on a house of lies to the American people. Remember when President Obama said, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, which of course was, and this was I don't remember, 1,600-page bill that was put forth in front of the Congress and voted on within about 48 hours. Nobody could understand what was in it. We were told this is not socialized medicine. It's not a step towards socialized medicine. This is the cure-all for the American healthcare system. And of course, that wasn't true either, because now, just less than a decade later, you had every major Democratic presidential candidate, or most of them, anyways, on the stump claiming we now need Medicare for all. We need a one-pay. We need the government in charge of all healthcare. For some reason, they thought it was a good idea to bankrupt every private health insurer in the entire country and put their workers out of business, while the United States government manages our healthcare. Now, socialized medicine hasn't worked anywhere. You ask people in the
Nope.
UK, yeah, they don't mind it being free, but they have to wait, I don't know how many months just for an appointment or for treatment. And the quality when they get there is a disaster, absolutely a disaster.
Mhm.
And I don't believe in socialized medicine. I don't believe we should be heading down that path. But the primary problem with Obamacare is and really with any entitlement system, is that once you put it in place and people rely upon it, it's very, very difficult to undo. So I think that we're going to need a solution at some point that is better than Obamacare. And I'm sure that's not going to be too difficult for a Republican-led House to come up with. Any solution, in my mind, has to have market-based solutions. As you know, and you've learned this over a lifetime, as have I, that when the government subsidizes it, the price goes up dramatically. The government for decades has been subsidizing college tuition. And guess what happens to the price? It just keeps going up and up and up because somebody other than the user of that service is paying for it, the taxpayers. The same thing
No
has happened
question.
here for a long time, and socialized medicine would be that on steroids. So private insurance, I believe that people that are employed, their employers providing health insurance as part of their job, as a benefit of that job, has worked for a long time. It's a good system, but it's become very, very expensive, especially for small businesses to absorb those costs. Our government has no problem heaping on more and more regulations and more costs on small business, and assuming that it can afford to pay those costs, just like giant Fortune 500 companies. Well, they can't, and especially New Jersey. What our government hopefully is learning is that small businesses can't survive anything that are dumped on them. I think you're going to see a lot of companies not bounce back from this, and you're going to see a lot of people who've lost jobs in the last 3 months lose those jobs permanently. I'm hoping that's not the case, but right now our government isn't helping them. You've heard the greatest lie of all time. I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. Well, a lot of people have paid the price for believing that lie. And healthcare is just one aspect of a way our government is not helping us. It's harming what we get. It's increasing the price of it. It's lowering the quality of it. And I don't think the American people are going to want to put up with it much longer.
Right. David, give me your insight into the current situation that we have now with the tragic loss of life of the gentleman in Minneapolis and the subsequent video, which clearly incriminates the police officer without question. And then using that as a launch pad to begin the destruction and looting and stealing and arson of some of these areas. We as constitutional Republicans believe that the Republican Party must restore law and order, and that we must put the fear of God, if you will, back into the criminal. And give me some of your thoughts on what's going on with this current situation happening in our nation, especially in our cities.
I think this was absolutely the worst possible time for something like this to occur. Following on 3 months of a lockdown, people being trapped in their homes, losing their jobs, seeing their savings dwindle, and seeing the economy just absolutely collapse. For something like this to happen, I watched the video, as did most Americans. What happened to George Floyd was a horrible, horrible thing. That police officer, I don't know what he was thinking, but his job and now being charged with murder, I think is the appropriate remedy, and he's going to face justice.
Right.
Fortunately, as you know, there's due process in this country. He's going to get the due process that he denied to Mr. Floyd. But I don't see any outcome for him other than being in prison for a very, very long time. I think the protests over what happened to him are legitimate and warranted. Our First Amendment guarantees to people the right to protest.
Right.
And happy to see a very angry and outraged response to what happened, because it is outrageous that anybody should be treated that way, that somebody could be put in that situation who, from what I've seen and read, committed no crime, was accused of something, and then is taken to the ground and had the life snuffed out of him by an overzealous and I don't even want to say incompetent, because I don't know whether it was intentional or through stupidity, but had his life taken away. We, getting back to what this group stands for, the Constitution, there's a 14th Amendment that guarantees us all equal protection under the law. Male, female,
Correct.
black, white, Jewish, Christian, or otherwise. The police need to treat all of us equally. Their job is to protect life and limb, not to murder people that they're taking into custody, because a lot of people are arrested that aren't guilty. And even the guilty ones are entitled to their constitutional rights and their right to life and liberty until a judge or a jury decides otherwise. I was very disappointed in what happened to Mr. Floyd. I was also very unhappy to see what unfortunately many of these protests turn into. I don't even want to turn into, because I don't think the people that are legitimately protesting what happened are the cause of this. The people that join the protest with ulterior motives. And that is, hey, we can get away with smashing and breaking things, hurting people, starting fires, assaulting police officers, looting stores, burning down whatever we want to burn down, because it's now a free-for-all and no one's going to stop us. That absolutely cannot happen. This is a nation of laws. I believe in the rule of law. Our governments need that. Our police force needs to enforce that and do so appropriately. There are certain bad elements to unfortunately, to our law enforcement community, and I think the police officer in this case, Mr. Chauvin, is one of those bad elements. But the vast majority of our men and women in blue are doing the best they can in very dangerous circumstances.
No question.
And I wish they had more public support in doing that job to keep all of us safe and alive and secure. And
no question.
Officers like Mr. Chauvin don't deserve to be police officers. They don't deserve the badge that they've been given. And I think his quick firing was the right response. I think we very carefully, getting back to what I first said, which is this was the worst possible time for this to happen. We need to make sure that our government restores a sense of respect for our laws and make sure that our laws are complied with. And then on the other hand, to avoid the next George Floyd, we need to make sure all Americans have the right, have the respect for and the trust in our law enforcement. There's no reason that a black man or woman in this country should be afraid of getting arrested, afraid that they might be shot or killed on the way to prison.
No question.
They need to have the same confidence in law enforcement that we all do. And that's something that we need to work on and correct in our society. If we lose the respect for the rule of law, we face some real serious challenges as a society and as a nation.
Right. And as you're aware, David, as many people are aware, that we as the Constitutional Republican movement here in New Jersey, now we have the Delaware Constitutional Republicans, we have a Tennessee state Senate candidate who's running as a Constitutional Republican, we're going to have on later. We believe that due process, the 14th Amendment, also should apply to the developing human being, the unborn child within the womb. And we've put out a series entitled Abortion versus Natural Rights, which is a detailed analysis of how abortion became legal in this nation, the many foibles that occurred with the Roe v. Wade decision, and also a legal challenge to it. And I know that we're on the other end of the spectrum on this issue, but that doesn't mean we can't have a good conversation and respect one another as we do. And it's important for people to realize, even though that we may be on opposite sides of an issue, that doesn't mean that we're not Republicans and that we're not trying to grow our party and make our party strong, and for you to be a good representative of the people who you want to represent there in CD3 in Washington. So
I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. You and I have known each other for quite a while, and we've had a lot of conversations on policy. And we don't agree on 100% of the issues. I don't agree with my wife on
Right.
100% of issues. Yeah, I respect what you believe in and the foundation upon which that philosophy is built.
And as I do you as well, David. And let me ask you a question in response to the fact that there seems to be a separation between the decision makers and the upper hierarchy of the Republican Party, and also the regular middle class grassroots, if you will, Republicans. And one of the objectives of the Constitutional Republican movement is to bridge this gap, and really make the Republican Party a republic, a representative of all the people, not just the decision makers. What do you think that we can do as Republicans, our movement, you as a representative can do to eliminate some of the stereotypes that have been given the Republican Party, that we are only for those who have a lot of money, we're only for the 2% at the top, which isn't true. The party was founded on representing the middle class and enabling middle class people to be able to flourish and to work and to gain the fruits of their labor. And that message needs to be brought back, and it needs to be brought back in our urban communities, that we are indeed the party that ended slavery, that gave due process of law to all people, regardless of who they are, what they look like, and also to give Black Americans the right to vote, to give women the right to vote, to recognize Native Americans as the United States citizens. These are all Republican accomplishments. And what do you think we need to do to better get that message out to the people that we are truly the party of liberty and justice for all?
Yes, we absolutely are that. And we obviously remind people every chance we can that this was a party founded to abolish slavery. And Abraham was the first Republican president, and he did abolish slavery. And I think that one of the biggest problems, or one of the biggest challenges that we have, is that the Democrats are much better at creating that kind of stereotype about Republicans, which is where the rich, where the party of the elite, which is strange because when you look at let's say Wall Street partners at major investment banks like Goldman Sachs and others, their partnership is overwhelmingly Democratic. Look at our governor; he was at Goldman Sachs. The last Democratic governor, Orzine, was a partner at Goldman Sachs.
Yes,
they tend to be
Orzine as well.
Liberal. Hollywood celebrities tend to be overwhelmingly liberal. Surprisingly, the tech industry in Silicon Valley and elsewhere tends to be overwhelmingly liberal and democratic. And what I've seen, and particularly of late, and particularly with Donald Trump coming into leadership of our party and our country, nothing could be further from the truth. I see the grassroots of this country, the working men and women of this country, overwhelmingly being Republicans. And I see the elitist, mega wealthy tend to be overwhelmingly Democratic. And yet this reputation of being the party of the rich, the party of the elite, is still used against Republicans in an attempt to try and win some votes here and there. And I think we need to do a better job of countering that marketing by continuing to see principles that the average working man and woman in this country finds important to them. That we care about their lives, we care about their economic lives. That a government check, a government handout is not the goal. People want and work in a country built on free enterprise and capitalism. That the private sector is the greatest job creator the world has ever known in this country.
Yep, no question.
Opportunities to build a better life for them and their families than they did previously. And it's not because the government was there in some kind of a nanny state to make sure that they got a handout when they needed one. It was because we created a platform and the foundation for private sector to flourish. And that means low regulation, low taxes, respect for the small businessman and the entrepreneur that I think are founding principles of the Republican Party. And that the Democratic Party not only takes for granted, they almost disrespect it. And they want take advantage of it. Someone gave an example to me recently that Democrats view private businesses as cows to be milked. Well, at some point, as many people have famously said, you run out of other people's money, and that cow dies.
Yes,
We need to
that's
make
right.
the American economy as strong going forward as it's been in the past. I've got 4 teenage daughters; they're going to be around for a long time. I want to make sure, this economy is strong for them and for their children. And where the Democratic Party has us going these days towards socialism, toward more
Hmm.
reliance on the government,
Hmm.
caretaker, more disrespect of the private sector. It's just I listened to the Democratic presidential candidates who have been running over the past year, and it just
Hmm.
astounds me that either they believe what they're saying, or they think that the American people are so stupid as to believe what they're saying. But
Yes.
we looked at the economy over the last 4 years leading up to the current corona crisis. The economy was getting stronger. Unemployment was at record lows. The stock market was at record highs. People were employed. The economy was growing, and we need to return to that. And I don't see Joe Biden taking us in that direction. In fact, I think he's going to wind up taking us in absolutely the wrong direction. And I think
Hmm.
4 more years of Donald Trump.
Absolutely, David. And as we conclude the conversation, it's been very enlightening, but please inform the voters of CD3 what you would like to share with them and tell them why you would be the best representative for them in Washington, D.C.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, JR. I've got a lifetime of experience in the private sector, turning around a struggling business and creating thousands of jobs along the way. I understand what it's like. I understand the challenges of doing that, of meeting a payroll, paying taxes, of dealing with government regulation. And I'm sick of it. And I know a lot of small businesses, particularly right now, and particularly what they're facing, given the current situation, are sick of it as well. We need people in office that are fighting for us, not fighting against us, who are fighting to cut taxes, cut regulation, and help the men and women in this state and in this country provide a better life for themselves and for their children than they've had. I think my background as an attorney and a businessman is ideal. I'm not a career politician, and I don't intend to become one. I want to serve my country in Congress. As you know, because I was in the last meeting I went to of the Constitutional Republicans, I advocated for 3 constitutional amendments, and I still do.
Hmm.
In fact, I just signed a pledge regarding one of them. But I think we need to have a balanced budget amendment, so we stop
Hmm.
digging the hole year after year for our country and our economy. I think we need a line item veto for our president on spending bills to make sure that wasteful spending can be cut. A lot of people
Hmm.
in Congress just want to bring home the bacon for their home district. That may help them in their district, but it doesn't help the rest of us. So
Right.
the president be able to strike out wasteful spending bills. No more bridges to nowhere. And then finally, we need term limits in Congress. We shouldn't have career politicians serving in Washington for 20, 30, 40 years. If you can't get it done in the first handful of terms, you shouldn't be there for decades. And I am fully in favor and signed a term limit pledge that I'll support that. And that's an amendment that would be required of the Constitution, and I support it fully. In fact, I intend to co-sponsor it when I get down to Congress next year.
Well, I would certainly say, David, that Ronald Reagan would be very pleased to know you and meet you, and I'm sure that you would have his endorsement. All of those different amendments were all, of course, very popular during his administration, and he would be all for you proposing those amendments. And I want to thank you, David, for joining me. I hope you'll come back soon to be with us. The election primary, of course, is in July. People are going to be receiving mail-in ballots, so we want to make sure that they get them filled out and back in to be counted on. But again, David, thank you so much for joining us. We'll do this again, and all the best to you and your campaign.
JR, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here. I look forward to seeing you again soon as we come out of this thing and we can actually have meetings face to face again instead of on Zoom. But thank you very much.
We'll look forward to it, David. Thank you very much again, and all the best.
Take care, my friend. Thank you.
Take care.